Hello, I'm Randy Bailey. My wife and I are children's ministry directors at Calvary Chapel, and I would like to tell you a story of my hunting expedition this past October and how God worked in my life that weekend. Every year, I go elk hunting with a friend of mine, and we backpack in about 6 miles into the wilderness. And on opening day this year, we headed out. My friend went in one direction, and I decided that I was going to hunt on the trail from base camp and proceed about 1.5 miles up the trail to a meadow, which is up at a higher elevation. So it was a cold morning, and I was all bundled up, and I had my gun and my backpack, and I started slowly hiking up the trail. And I don't really want to say hiking, because if you're hiking, you're not hunting. That's what I've been told. So I started walking up this trail at a very slow pace. And every step, you kind of look around and check out your environment, because you never know when an elk may just suddenly appear. So as I meandered up this trail, after about 15 minutes, I got very warm. So I sat down on the trail, I leaned my gun against a tree, and I took my jacket off, and I was going to tie my jacket onto my backpack. And at that time, I heard a noise behind me. And I turned around, and here was a herd of elk that had come down off this ridge into a drinking hole or pond. And at that time, my heart was just beating 100 miles a minute, because I couldn't believe it. It was a small herd. There was a bunch of cows. There was a spike that came through, and after a little bit of time, a 5x5 bull came down out of the ridge and into this bowl where the pond was. And so I turned around and grabbed my gun and leaned my gun against this log that was laying right by the trail. I used it as a gun rest. And I was checking out the herd that were drinking out of this water. So I grabbed my gun and I put my gun on this log that was laying on the trail for a gun rest. And I was checking out the herd. And the herd consists of cows and a spike and a 5-point bull. And looking through the scope is really difficult to keep an eye on which animal's which, because I'm looking through the trees. It's about 80 yards away, and I was looking up at a higher elevation, because these elk, they came down off a ridge. And I think I spotted the 5-point bull, which I was interested in, but I couldn't really see his horns. I could see his body. So I was waiting and waiting for him to lift up his head and make himself known to me. So just about at that time, half the herd took off. They went back up top of the ridge. Something was up. They knew something was up. And 2 cows were standing there looking at me with their noses in the air, sniffing. And from 80 yards away, they could smell me. Even though I was like hiding behind this log with my gun, they knew I was there. And the rest of them took off. And the 5-point bull and this other elk kind of proceeded slowly back up to the ridge. And so I went from having a nice, good gun rest to a point where I was holding my gun kind of freehand, kneeling. And you gotta remember, this is I'm looking through trees, so the window of opportunity is very small. But there was an alley that I could see up to where the bull was. But he was still hiding out. All I could see is the back end of him. So I was just waiting. I was sighting down this alley that was open and just waiting for him to step out into the open. And it seemed like it was minutes like 2 or 3 minutes, which seemed like hours actually. And the gun was getting really heavy. But I remember peeking over the scope and looking for any movement up there, and just when I did that, he moved across that alley to the opening. So I got back on my scope real quick, and I aimed, took a quick shot. It was just real quick, matter of seconds. And I was like, oh my goodness, I just shot at an elk. This is my first animal I ever shot at. I marked where I shot with some flagging, because I've been told that if you shoot, you should mark where you shot from and the direction that the animal was headed or at, so that you don't get disoriented and lose sight, like where was that animal at. So anyways, I marked my where I shot, and I marked the alley where I was shooting through, and I called my friend on the radio and told them that I just took a shot at a bull, and I think I got him. It was 100 yards away, the shot, and it seemed like it was a decent shot. So I moseyed up to the top of this ridge 100 yards away, and what did I see? Nothing. I didn't see that I hit him at all. There wasn't any blood anywhere on the bushes, on the rocks, and the trail, the tracks up there. There were some tracks, but there wasn't anything definite. So this animal was gone. The whole herd was gone, and I couldn't believe it. So I marked where I thought the elk was with some flagging on a tree, and I started doing a search. And in my heart, I said, I can't believe I missed him, because it seemed like a good shot. So I spent the next hour and a half looking for this animal, which I possibly shot. And it really started bothering me, because I did not want to wound an animal and have him run off and suffer for hours or days or who knows long. And so what I did was I thought, well, I'm gonna call my wife. So I picked up my cell phone. I got cell reception up there, and I called her. And she was not home, but I did leave a message. I said, Sandy, I had just had some excitement. I shot at a bull, and I can't find it. Can you pray when you get home that I either miss this animal or that I'll find it? So I had my bases covered there, and the more I looked, the more I was just getting down, because I'm really have a lot of sympathy for animals, and especially herd animals. And my heart was kind of breaking, because I did not want to go home knowing that I wounded an animal and he may still be out there. So I prayed to God. And at this time, I just said, Lord, you can handle this. I can't handle this. I'm going to turn it over to you. So I said this prayer. And at that time, my friend came down. He helped me search some more, and he said, "You know what, Randy? I think you just missed this animal." So I said, "Okay, let's just agree that I missed it, and we'll go on from here, right?" So he took off and went back to where he was hunting, and I'm going to continue over to this meadow I was talking about earlier, but this time I decided not to walk on the trail anymore. I would go cross country. And while I was walking, it started pouring rain on me, and so any of the tracks that I could possibly see, I wasn't even looking for this animal. So anyways, I was just going to continue on to the meadow. And I was praying Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So I was saying that, and that's usually what I do when I'm hunting. I'm usually praying and reciting verses, but this one was a good verse to say at this time. So I noticed up on the horizon, this ridge, which was just real nice green. Where I hunt is a burned out area, and about 20 years ago, the fire came through, and the place looks pretty dead. There's just dead trees standing, no green. But where I was headed, I saw some green up on this ridgeline, so I decided to head up that direction. And that was the same direction as the meadow that I was talking about. So I continued walking up to the green patch of trees on this ridgeline. And as I walk, I often, like I said earlier, I say memory verses. And especially when I'm down and stuff, I have certain ones that I really like. And so I was reciting Psalm 139 by memory. And I'm going to go ahead and read part of this to you because it means a lot to me and how God knows us so intimately and how He cares for us. So Psalm 139, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. For there's not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You have hedged me behind and before and laid your hand upon me. And it was at that verse, when I was walking, that I looked over and I saw this horns, rack of horns, and this big body of an elk 50 yards away from me. And I couldn't believe my eyes. He was standing there. When I first took my first shot, I was facing east and he was facing south. This time I was facing east and he was facing north, which will be important in a minute. So I was amazed to see this animal just standing there and almost looked like he was kind of leaning on a tree. And I don't think he even saw me. And so I walked up to the closest tree and I leaned my rifle against it and got a good sturdy rest. And I sighted in and took my shot. And I shot right behind his shoulder, which was, I know, a good shot. And to make sure that he wouldn't run off again, I racked the slide. I had a Remington 760 pump, 30-06 I was using. And I shot again, just to make sure. He turned 180 degrees, took 2 steps, and he was down. And at that moment, I prayed for this animal that he would die quickly. Like I said, I'm sympathetic towards those things. And I marked where I shot because I'm always curious, where I shot, and so I walked over to the animal and he was deceased. So I called my friend on the radio and I gave him the GPS coordinates so he could come up and help me. And as we were taking care of the animal, getting him out, we found that he had 1 bullet on one side of him and he had 2 bullets on the other. So it was the same elk I shot at earlier. And by GPS coordinates, it was like 0.41 miles away and probably half a mile if you follow the terrain. So for my first shot earlier in the morning to the shot later on, it was a half mile. That animal had traveled a half a mile. And his herd had left him. He was hurting. And he had, like I said, 1 bullet hole on one side and 2 on the other. And at that point, I said, this is amazing. What is the probability of me finding this animal? And I was telling this story to my kids. I said, I remember Isaac. I said, Isaac, if I stay right here and you can go hide a half a mile away in any direction, and what's the probability of me walking right to you and finding you? And I believe that God answered prayers that morning. My wife prayed that I would find this animal, and I was praying that God would take care of the situation. And He certainly did that. I'm quite sure the probability of me finding this animal just randomly walking through the forest would be astronomical. There's so many things that can change your course. There's downed logs. I could go right side of one tree, left side of the other. I'm stepping over things. It's just amazing how God led me within 50 yards of this animal. So I think that was a miracle. So that was my hunting story and the testimony of how good God is and how He still works in our daily lives. So, hope you enjoyed that story. Thank you.